everybody? Welcome back to Elvis Junction Reviews. Today we're looking at another product from Athearn. We're looking at an Athearn Genesis Union Pacific GE U50, and this is Union Pacific number 47. As you can see, the picture is kind of small. I understand it's a big locomotive, so they had to shrink it. But I'd also like to point out something. This is the U50's locomotive. That's the box. It's pretty big. Especially when I compare it to, I don't know, this ACU. That's how big a U50 box is. It's quite ridiculous, but it's a long locomotive. It's one of the longest locomotives ever produced in North America. That's just a diesel locomotive. So let's go ahead and get it out of the box. I hope everybody's having a good day today. I'm having a good day today. This thing just came in. So here is the instruction manual. So we'll be using this for when we do our sounds. Piece of foam here. Oh my goodness. This thing is crazy looking. The U50 is an extremely unique locomotive. And really quickly, before we actually look at that, right in here is a bag with some extra, with these almost look like, that's an extra bell right here. Let's see if you can. That's an extra bell, and these look like plates, almost like metallic plates. And it seems that I got a knuckle, which makes me wonder if one of the knuckles is broken. But you know what? We will find out. Let's get these bags in here. Okay. Slide this piece. Oh, there we go. Doesn't always want to cooperate, these pieces of plastic. The plastic clamshell. Alrighty. No plastic film. Okay. Oh, this thing's heavy. Alright. Okay. Cooperate here, please. So there are little pieces of foam here at the back of the locomotive. And I'm going to struggle with this. So I'm going to get the foam out on my own, and then we'll cut back to some history. And now, on some history, which comes from Athearn's website itself. Due to the increase of better highways in the 1950s, the trucking industry was beginning to siphon off time-sensitive traffic from the railroads. Consequently, in the late 1950s, Union Pacific began seeking ways to increase the horsepower of their locomotives in order to help improve train speeds without having to add more locomotives to their trains. One method to achieve these goals was to mount two complete prime movers on one chassis. The UP asked the three major locomotive builders at the time, Alco, General Electric, and EMD, to submit proposals using this concept. In response, General Electric created their 5,000 horsepower U50 model, a design which utilized two 2,500 horsepower prime movers. Quite literally, they took the same prime movers that were in their U25Bs, put them on the same chassis, and then gave the locomotive a very funky-looking cab. Starting in September 1963, the UP purchased a total of 23 U50s, all of which were retired by the mid-1970s. Now, the Union Pacific was not the only buyer of the U50. The Southern Pacific would purchase 3, and unfortunately, they were not liked by crews. Crews complained about the lacking of a nose in the case of a grade crossing incident. They did not like how cramped the cab was, and that the cab vibrated when the blower of the first prime mover that was directly behind the cab would start going. Unfortunately, they stopped using these as mainline locomotives and would use them on haulers from the LA area to West Colton. But they would usually put these locomotives in the middle of two other locomotives, say another U25B or a GP35. Now, our locomotive here, number UP47, was built sometime in 1963, and I couldn't get an exact date, and it ran with the UP up until the 1970s, and it was soon scrapped. In fact, the only major large horsepower locomotives that still exist are a few DD40AXs, and I believe one GTEL turbine locomotive, and I know that one's currently sitting in Ogden, Utah, with a few other interesting locomotives. All right, so with history out of the way, let's get into some details, starting with the front. Alrighty, so we're looking at the front of the locomotive, and I've got to be honest, this probably might be the easiest locomotive to ever review because of how short the front is. I don't have to do any manual focusing up here towards the number boards or down here towards the nose. So at the very top, you can see a rotating beacon light. Now, we will get a better view of that when we look at the roof of the locomotive. Working our way down here, you can see the forward headlight, which operates when the locomotive is in a forward motion. On either side of the headlight are the number boards here as well as here, and they both say 47. We have two large windshields right here as well as right here. Two separately applied windshield wipers here, and we have a couple of gray grab irons that protect the bases of those windshield wipers here and here. We have two yellow widthwise grab irons here as well as here. Below those are two class lights here and right there. We have some more yellow grab irons that lead from the top of the nose down to this very step here on the pilot of the locomotive, or the plow, if you will. We have UP47, Union Pacific, two red painted MU sockets right here, and another yellow widthwise grab iron. Here is the wraparound portion of the red sill stripe of the Union Pacific locomotives up until, I want to say, at least 2004 when they switched to the yellow sill stripe, which was more reflective because of FRA standards. And we have two gray grab irons here as well as here. We have a little step so you can climb from this locomotive to another locomotive if you have these things MU'd together. Here is the knuckle. We have 4 MU hoses on either side of the knuckle here, and you can see underneath those hoses is the coupler cut bar. All right, let's look at some rear detail. Looking at the rear of the locomotive, starting here at the very top, you can see the bottom of the radiator section of the rear of the locomotive. We will get a better view of that when we look at the roof of the locomotive. We have UP47 right here. There is the rear headlight, which operates when the locomotive is reversing. There's what I believe to be the sand filter hatch right here. There's some kind of compartment right here as well. Here is the parking brake, and as you can see, it looks kind of angled to the side. Now, I'm not sure if that's a factory defect or if that had to be glued back on by my friend whose locomotive this is. I need to correct myself. I did not purchase this locomotive, my friend did. That also explains this KD knuckle here. Anyway, moving down, we keep going. We have 2 more MU sockets right here. And if we zoom in on there, we have 4 MU cables here, and there is the coupler cut bar underneath the knuckle. All right, let's look at some side detail. Looking at the conductor side of the locomotive first, starting at the very front, we have a big red F to indicate that this is the front of the locomotive. We have dependable transportation right here, along with the number 47. There are a couple of side mirrors here, as well as here. You can see the door that leads into the cab right here. Moving along, we have our first truck here. And I also want to point something out. This truck is free moving. The center trucks, so this one here and the one directly behind the fuel tank, are the only powered trucks on the locomotive. This one is free floating. In fact, if I lift this locomotive up, you will see that there is some articulation because this is a big locomotive. It needs to articulate, and as does the pilot. So the pilot is connected to this motorized truck here. If we look behind the handrails, you can see the large blower that was simulated by Athearn, which I think is a very, very fantastic detail. And you can also see through the grates, which I think is even better. You can see the walkway right here, as well as a couple of safety bits here. I'm not quite sure what this triangle was for. I believe that's a jack pad right there. And if we move the locomotive along, we have a ladder up to the walkway here, and I can just see the great truck detail. I love this truck detail, like the springs and the speed indicator here, the brake shoes right here. Just amazing looking, this thing. Move the locomotive along. It says Union Pacific right here. You can't see it, but this is see-through. In fact, yes, it is. Actually, you can see it just there, just a little bit. That is a see-through grate right here. Here is the fuel tank. For a locomotive of this size, it's rather small, but fuel prices weren't that big of a concern back in the 60s. In the 70s, yes, but in the 60s, not so much. And you can see it says Union Pacific right there. And if we move the locomotive along some more, towards the end here, we can see where the rear prime mover is here. And there is that prime mover's blower right here, and that section is also see-through. And you can see another 47 right here, another step ladder here, one more jack pad, and you can see how the rear of the locomotive curves. It is quite literally the same. If on the engineer's side, the only difference is this little ladder right here that leads up to the roof of the locomotive. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same. All right, let's look at some roof detail. Okay, so we're looking at the roof of the locomotive. So right at the very front, there are two grab irons right here as well as here. Here is a better view look at that beacon light that I mentioned earlier, and you can actually see the cable that runs from the beacon light down into where the electrical compartment of the locomotive actually is. On this radiator section here, we have two single chime air horns here as well as here. Here is the actual radiator section for the first prime mover, and directly behind that is the exhaust stack for that prime mover. Like I said in the history, this locomotive has two prime movers, each producing 2,500 horsepower each. It was the same prime mover that was in the General Electric U25B, which is the same locomotive that kind of threw EMD for a curveball, and they weren't expecting it to actually be as successful as it ended up being. We have two more grab irons here as well as here. I'm not quite sure what these vents are for. If they are vents, they could be grates, but if anybody does know in the comments, please let me know. We have the second exhaust stack for the second prime mover, and here is the second radiator section for that prime mover as well. And if I'm correct, I think you can just see it. That circular bit there might, hold on. That might be the speakers for this locomotive, but I'm not quite sure. All right, let's get this locomotive up on the test track. Alrighty, so we have the locomotive here up on the test track, and I should probably mention first that this locomotive nearly almost takes up half of the length of the test track. It is ridiculous how long this locomotive is. But anyway, turning the power on will turn on the engine. Alrighty, so we're going to go over the mostly basic features that you get with this locomotive. Starting off with F0. F0 is the main headlight, and as you can see, it is on. It is quite dim in my opinion, and I should mention that F7 is not even on until now. F7 dims the headlight, but it also activates crude chatter. I personally am not a big fan of that. I wish that it was in, for instance, F21, F22, or F28, because all three of those function keys are not assigned to a Tsunami decoder according to Athearn's diesel manual instructions. F1 is the bell. Also quite quiet as well. F2 is a longhorn. Now that is not loud. In fact, that is, sorry, it's not quiet, it's loud. F3 is a short horn. Alright, my system just beeped at me. Now, if we were moving the locomotive in a much faster pace than a snail's pace, we would be able to hear the dynamic brakes effect or straight to idle. Unfortunately, we don't have enough test track to actually find out for ourselves. So, hopefully in a future Model Trains Galore, you'll be able to see this locomotive, and I'll be able to have the dynamic brakes going for you. F5 is the beacon light. Very cool indeed. Now, F6 will either turn on the class lights or the number boards. It turned on the number boards, and I can prove this to you by unplugging the spotlight. You can now see that they are on and that they are flickering. Do not worry, that is not your eyes playing tricks on you. That is not the locomotive's fault. That is 60 frames per second LEDs flash at a certain frames per second, so that's why they are flickering like that. So do not worry, that is not the locomotive's problem. Plug the locomotive back in. Now, like I said earlier, F7, it dims the headlight, but it also activates crew chatter. And the best way, in my opinion, to hear this is to take the power off, turn it immediately back on, and then hit F7 to hear it. Now, F8 will mute the locomotive. It'll mute everything. Now, there should be a few more auxiliary lighting effects, so I have to go to F24 to find out. It appears not. And let's try F25. Also appears not. Some locomotives will have a extra lighting feature, like for instance, on one of my Denver Rio Grande tunnel motors, it has not only a headlight, but it has a driver light, a ditch light, and a beacon. In order to turn on that beacon, I had to go and press F24 or F25 to actually be able to turn that on. One of you commenters actually referred it to me, and then I found out my way. Alright, so I don't have enough room to move this locomotive. I'm so sorry. So let's just enjoy it for a little bit. I'll blow the horn a couple more times for you, and then we will get on to my final thoughts. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn the number boards off. The beacon, F0. I'm going to hit F3 again because I like a little bit of simplicity. And let's go ahead and turn the power off. And now let's get into my final thoughts. So overall, I think this is an absolutely amazing looking locomotive. It looks great, but it also sounds great. And this thing is huge. It is one of the longest locomotives I've ever reviewed, second to the gas turbine that I reviewed a few months ago. And I've seen this locomotive run in action, and it runs great. I would really pick up a lot of the SP ones if I had the money to, but these are expensive. Not as expensive as that gas turbine, but it's pretty expensive regardless. Anyway, if I'm correct, I believe he bought this at the Train Shop, which is located in Santa Clara, California. So if you're in the Bay Area, go ahead and check them out. They have great prices, great selection. I cannot recommend them enough. I highly recommend. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, also subscribe if you have not, and hit that notification bell to see what I have to upload in the future. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.